I thought I was going to spend an evening reading about an old king list. Instead, I ended up staring at a piece of clay and asking myself a question I still can't completely answer. How does an entire civilization record kings ruling for tens of thousands of years and expect anyone to take it seriously? At first, it sounds almost absurd. Then, you realize who wrote it, and suddenly, it isn't so easy to dismiss. The object that started all of this doesn't look particularly impressive. If you walked through a museum gallery, you might pass it without a second glance. It's a weathered clay prism, roughly 8 inches tall, cracked with age, and covered from top to bottom with tiny wedge-shaped impressions. Nothing about it screams history-changing discovery. But those little wedges contain one of the most remarkable documents ever recovered from the ancient world. The artifact is known today as the Weld-Blundell Prism. It was acquired by the archaeologist Herbert Weld-Blundell during excavations in what is now Iraq, before eventually finding its home in Oxford's Ashmolean Museum. Dating to the early 2nd millennium BCE, it preserves a much older tradition copied and recopied by generations of Mesopotamian scribes. Those scribes gave the document a purpose that seems almost familiar. It is, in many ways, a list of kings, cities, dynasties, successions, who ruled after whom, how long each ruler remained in power. At first, nothing seems unusual. You begin reading through the later sections, and it almost feels like a carefully organized government archive. Some of the cities mentioned have been excavated by archaeologists. Several later rulers appear in other inscriptions discovered across Mesopotamia. For a while, everything feels comfortably historical. Then I reach the beginning. I actually stopped reading for a moment because I thought I'd misunderstood the translation. The first king, Alulim of Eridu, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years. His successor reigns for 36,000 years. One king after another governs for spans of time that completely ignore everything we know about human life. By the time the earliest section ends, the combined reigns stretch into hundreds of thousands of years. My first reaction was probably the obvious one. Surely someone copied a number incorrectly. That would explain everything. Except, it doesn't. The Weld-Blundell Prism isn't the only surviving version of this document. Archaeologists have uncovered multiple copies of the Sumerian King List from different Mesopotamian cities. They're not identical. Some omit rulers, some rearrange dynasties, some preserve only fragments. That's exactly what you'd expect from texts copied over centuries. What surprised me was what didn't change. Those enormous reign lengths appear again and again. Different scribes, different locations, different centuries. The details vary. The impossible numbers remain. It does tell us they were preserved deliberately. Somebody wanted future generations to read them exactly that way. That realization completely changed how I approached the mystery. Instead of asking whether the scribes made mistakes, I started asking why they thought these numbers mattered. Mainstream archaeology offers the explanation accepted by most historians. The earliest reigns are generally understood as symbolic rather than literal. Ancient societies often used extraordinarily large numbers to communicate ideas about prestige, divine authority, or unimaginable antiquity. The first kings belonged to an age that wasn't meant to resemble ordinary human history. That interpretation fits what we know about many ancient cultures. Large numbers weren't always functioning as calendars. Sometimes they were expressing significance. At first, that sounds like a satisfying answer. Then the king list quietly introduces another puzzle. Something changes. The reigns begin shrinking. Thousands of years become hundreds. Eventually, hundreds become decades. By the later sections of the document, many rulers govern for periods that seem entirely believable. I had to stop and think about that for a minute. If the huge numbers were only symbolic, why gradually stop using them? The answer appears immediately before the transition. Just one short sentence. Then the flood swept over. That's it. No dramatic speech, no lengthy description, no explanation of what happened. Just one line dividing two completely different worlds. Before the flood, kings rule for impossible lengths of time. After the flood, history slowly begins looking familiar. That single sentence has fascinated historians for generations. Most archaeologists believe Mesopotamian flood traditions preserve cultural memories of catastrophic flooding in southern Iraq. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers repeatedly overflowed, reshaping settlements and destroying communities. Excavations at several ancient cities have uncovered substantial flood deposits. What they do not show is evidence for one simultaneous flood covering the entire region. Instead, the archaeological picture suggests multiple devastating floods occurring in different places at different times. Over centuries, memories of those disasters may have blended into the great flood traditions that appear throughout Mesopotamian literature. One of the best-known examples survives in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, a man receives divine warning to build a great vessel before a catastrophic flood destroys humanity. Whether those stories preserve memories of real regional disasters, religious symbolism, or both, remains an active subject of scholarly discussion. The King List uses the flood differently. It isn't simply telling a flood story, it's dividing history itself. That made me wonder whether the scribes were trying to say that humanity lived under different conditions before this dividing event. Not necessarily that people literally lived for tens of thousands of years, but that the earliest age belonged to a different order entirely. That's interpretation, not evidence. The evidence is simply the structure of the document. Explaining why it was structured that way is where historians begin to disagree. Some scholars see the earliest section as mythology, gradually giving way to history. Others believe it preserves memories of legendary rulers remembered as semi-divine ancestors. Still others suggest the distinction between myth and history is largely a modern one. Ancient Mesopotamian scribes may have seen no contradiction in preserving both together. I honestly wasn't expecting that possibility. We instinctively separate religion, legend, and history into different shelves. To them, the distant past could be historically meaningful while also carrying profound religious significance. That perspective changes how the King List reads. Instead of asking whether it satisfies modern historical standards, we begin asking what the scribes themselves believed they were preserving. That naturally leads to another question. Who exactly were these scribes? They weren't amateur storytellers. Cuneiform required years of education. Students memorized hundreds of signs while studying mathematics, administration documents, literature, religion, and accounting. These people recorded taxes, contracts, court decisions, and royal inscriptions. Accuracy mattered. When they copied the King List, they weren't inventing a new story. They were preserving an older tradition. By the time the Weld Blundell Prism was written, that tradition had almost certainly existed for centuries. Exactly how many centuries? We simply don't know. One detail kept pulling me back to the very beginning. According to the King List, kingship first descended upon Eridu. That isn't just another place name. Archaeology has shown Eridu to be one of the oldest known urban settlements in southern Mesopotamia. Excavations uncovered consecutive temple complexes built one on top of another across many centuries. To later Mesopotamians, Eridu represented one of the oldest sacred cities in existence. Its place at the beginning of the King List wasn't accidental. Whether the earliest kings ruled exactly as described, the importance of Eridu almost certainly wasn't. The document repeats another phrase that caught my attention. It doesn't say one king conquered another city. It says kingship was lowered from heaven and afterward passed from city to city. Mainstream historians generally understand that statement as expressing divine legitimacy rather than describing a literal event. The King List presents one continuous line of rightful kingship moving through successive cities. It isn't trying to catalog every ruler who ever existed. It's establishing the legitimate succession of authority. That helps explain the document's political purpose. It doesn't completely explain those astonishing reign lengths. Another possibility comes from Mesopotamian mathematics itself. The Sumerians counted using a base 60 numerical system, rather than our familiar base 10. Many of the reign lengths in the King List follow mathematical patterns built around that system. Some historians suggest the numbers were carefully constructed according to symbolic mathematical relationships, instead of functioning as straightforward chronological records. If that's correct, modern readers may be interpreting the numbers in a way their creators never intended. That doesn't prove the reigns weren't literal, It simply offers another explanation consistent with the mathematical traditions of ancient Mesopotamia. Alternative interpretations continue to attract attention. Some researchers argue the earliest kings genuinely possessed dramatically longer lifespans. Others suggest the reign lengths were measured using units other than years. Still others believe the King List preserves memories of an unknown civilization unlike anything recognized by conventional archaeology. Those ideas remain popular because they take the text at face value. At present, however, archaeology has uncovered no evidence demonstrating that humans lived for tens of thousands of years. Nor has any alternative system of measurement gained broad scholarly acceptance. Each proposal explains part of the puzzle. None resolves every question. If you've been following this investigation with me, I'd really like to know where you land. Do you think the enormous reigns are primarily symbolic? Do you find the mathematical interpretation more convincing? Or is there another explanation you think deserves consideration? Leave a comment and let me know. And if you're enjoying exploring these ancient mysteries by starting with the evidence itself, consider subscribing so we can keep investigating together. By the time I finished reading the King List, I realized I'd stopped asking whether the first kings truly ruled for tens of thousands of years. A different question had taken its place. Why was preserving those extraordinary numbers so important that generations of highly trained scribes kept copying them century after century? The archaeological evidence gives us some firm ground. The Sumerian King List is an authentic ancient document. Multiple copies survive. It combines rulers who can be independently supported by archaeology with rulers who cannot. It deliberately separates the earliest kings from later history by the account of the flood, and it intentionally preserves reign lengths that far exceed ordinary human lifespans. Beyond those observations, interpretation begins. Mainstream historians generally see symbolic chronology, legendary tradition, or a blending of mythic and historical memory. Alternative explanations continue to be proposed, but none has gained broad acceptance because the archaeological evidence remains incomplete. Perhaps that's why this weathered clay prism still captures people's imagination, not because it gives us simple answers, because it preserves one of humanity's oldest unanswered questions. 4,000 years ago, an anonymous scribe carefully pressed these signs into wet clay. The cities changed, the kingdoms disappeared. The language itself eventually fell silent. But the question endured. Why did the Sumerians record kings ruling for tens of thousands of years? For now, the evidence invites us to investigate. It does not allow us to claim certainty. And somehow I think that makes the little clay prism even more remarkable.